We've heard a lot of people speculate that you and Senator Cruz may face each other again, not in a Senate rematch, but running for a higher office. What are your thoughts on running for president?
I don't want to do it. I will not do it. Amy and I are raising an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And we've spent the better part of the last 2 years not with each other, missing birthdays and anniversaries and time together. And our family could not survive more of that. We need to be together.
Is that reversible? You're saying you'll never run for president?
I'm saying that if elected to the Senate, I'll serve every day of that 6-year term. That I'm not looking at 2020, and in fact, I'm completely ruling that out. Not going to do that.
No matter what, win or lose, you're not going to run in 2020.
Win or lose, I'm not running in 2020. I got to tell you, it's incredibly flattering that anyone would ask me the question, or that's even up for discussion. But since people have asked, the answer is no.
You didn't sidestep that.
No.
Congressman, can you say definitively that no matter what happens tomorrow, you will not be a candidate for president in 2020?
I will not be a candidate for president in 2020.
Thanks.
That's, I think, as definitive as those sentences get.
Hallie, it speaks to O'Rourke's national profile. This continues to be a question for him. I was surprised at how definitively he answered that question no, as you would expect on the eve of a big Senate vote.
Tessa Stewart of Rolling Stone reports a week and a half after narrowly losing the closely watched Texas Senate race, the soon-to-be ex-congressman from El Paso met with the ex-president at Obama's office in Washington, D.C., the Washington Post reports. Obama must have liked what he heard because at a live podcast taping 4 days after their November 16th meeting, he told his former strategist, David Axelrod, that O'Rourke was a very impressive young man who reminded him of himself. The reason I was able to make a connection with a sizable portion of the country was because people had a sense that I said what I meant, Obama told Axelrod. What I oftentimes am looking for first and foremost is, do you seem to mean it? Are you in this thing because you have a strong set of convictions that you are willing to risk things for? The former president added, what I liked most about his race was that it didn't feel constantly poll-tested. It felt as if he based his statements and his positions on what he believed, and that you'd like to think is normally how things work. Sadly, it's not. Obama is not the only one who sees the similarities. A week and a half after the reported Obama-O'Rourke summit, Dan Pfeiffer, who served as a senior advisor to Obama, published The Case for Beto O'Rourke on the website of Crooked Media, which was co-founded with 3 other ex-administration officials. Not only does O'Rourke, a friend of the podcast, remind him of his old boss, Pfeiffer wrote that in certain respects, he outshines him. I have never seen a Senate candidate, including Obama in 2004, inspire the sort of enthusiasm that Beto did in his race, Pfeiffer wrote. This is about more than LeBron wearing a Beto hat or Beyonce sporting one on Instagram. It's about the people all over the country with no connection to Texas, with signs in their yards and stickers on their cars. It's about the hundreds of thousands of people across the country who gave small dollar donations because they were inspired by his candidacy and moved by his pledge to not take PAC money. The enthusiasm is real and matters. If Beto were to go to Iowa City next week, I am confident he would draw a crowd 3 times larger than any candidate has since Obama first stumped there. So as I read through this, I'm tempted to bang my fucking head against the desk here. Not really, but it's so frustrating because what he's describing here conveniently ignores something remarkable that happened in 2016. There was another candidate that inspired people across the country, that got them to register and vote for the first time, that got them to send in millions upon millions of dollars in small donations. That person is Bernie Sanders, but they're conveniently ignoring Bernie Sanders. And their silence on Bernie is deafening because it's not as if they're unaware of Bernie Sanders. These are ex-Obama administration officials. They have a political podcast. Odds are they know about Bernie Sanders, but they're choosing to ignore Bernie Sanders and pretend as if all of that momentum we saw was all in our heads. It was just a dream. Beto is the one who's doing what Obama did, not Bernie Sanders. It's beyond frustrating to me, and it makes it clear that all of these pundits are just Democratic Party hacks. They see what they want to see, and they refuse to acknowledge the reality of the situation. There's already a candidate that has enthusiasm, that walks into high schools and is welcomed as if he's a fucking rock star. And that person is Bernie, not Beto.
Well, for the two people that clicked on this that don't know who O'Rourke is, he was until a couple of months ago a congressman who represented Texas in the U.S. House until in March of 2017 he announced he was going to run against Cruz for a Senate seat, and despite narrowly losing by 1 point, 48 to 49, something like that, he was able to raise the most money of any Senate candidate ever, and it became the most expensive Senate race of all time, and he received the most votes for a Democrat in the state of Texas up to that point. Now, this is considered a big deal because he literally almost turned a red state blue, in that particular race. And if he had gotten 2 points more, he would have been the first first Democrat elected senator in Texas in, I believe, 30 years. And that actually did end up happening in Arizona with Sinema, who is another neoliberal piece of garbage. But we can get to her later on. So I started this off by playing the clip, or rather the clips of him saying, "I'm not going to run for president next year or in 2020. No way, no how." And I then followed up by playing the clip of Mike reading an article that described the different Obama holdovers who had decided to give him their sage wisdom and advice and, sit up in his ear. Because I often try to say that part of the problem with politics is that people get this tendency to follow behind the leader. And when enough people whisper in your ear, "Hey, you can do this, you start to think to yourself, I can pull this off." So if I'm being nice or generous, I'm going to say that it was a combination of, there was a poll in Iowa where he was in third place. So much so that there was a joke about, the top three Democrats are Beto, Bernie, and Biden. And the Obama holdovers getting in his ear. Those were the two factors I'm going to say changed his mind. But notably, when he ran for Senate, none of us on the left, most of our critiques were limited to, one statement here, one statement there. Basically, we really didn't have a problem with his actual message or positions. But then a good little number of liberal commentators decided to make some videos speaking about his record, and I'm going to play a couple, one in particular, Kyle's, because I think it's the most straight to the point. So I'll play that and then I'll give my own analysis.
I warned you that I did some more research and I found some stuff out. It ain't pretty, man. So let's go to strike one. Take a look at this. This is, he said this a few months ago when he was still running against Ted Cruz. He said, "Thanks to these Texans from IPAC for coming by today. Productive conversation on the current security situation in Israel and how the United States can continue to support our important ally in the region." To me, that's too much fawning praise of an apartheid state where they're doing illegal occupation and they're routinely massacring Palestinians. There's nothing there about like, hey, it's time for human rights for both sides. It's time to cut a peace deal for the Palestinians. That right there is just, I'm going to fawn and fall all over myself over Israel. There's going to be better candidates in the race. Look at the next one. So the AFL-CIO refused to endorse Beto. And why is that? Quote, "One of those concerns was likely O'Rourke's support in 2015 for allowing then-President Barack Obama to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade agreement with 11 Pacific Rim countries. Labor unions, including the Texas AFL-CIO, vocally opposed it, believing it would threaten American jobs." Okay, so the way that they described it there is a little misleading. What they're talking about is Beto supported fast track for TPP. Fast track is Congress is going to willingly give up all its authority to negotiate the specifics of the trade agreement and to say yes or no to individual provisions. We're going to abdicate our responsibility, turn it completely over to the president, and let him decide whatever in terms of this trade deal. That is stunningly horrendous. He went out of his way. Most of the Democrats said, no, we're not. Are you kidding me? I want to be able to see the final bill, and I want to have input and say for my constituents. No, I'm not going to just turn over. Yeah, here, go ahead, Obama, do the TPP. I don't care. He said yes to that. He cast a vote that was pro-TPP. Now, listen, he turns around now when it's politically inconvenient for him, similar to what Hillary Clinton did, and said, me? What, me? No. I was just, what had happened was the sun was in my eyes, and I had said, Obama can negotiate it, but then after, when we have the final vote, I would have voted no. Save it. Now, again, so that's strike two, but again, you might say, well, what if he is telling the truth? What if he would have voted no on the final TPP authorization, and he just was fine with fast-tracking it, but he would have flipped and been against it? If you happen to believe that, I think you're naive. But putting that aside, what should put to rest any question about that is this next one. 78 Democrats vote to weaken a key Wall Street regulation. You know who one of those Democrats was? Beto O'Rourke. He was one of the Democrats that sided with virtually all the Republicans to deregulate Wall Street. That's a strong strike three, son. That's a strong strike three. Now, after hearing all of that, seeing all of that, there's one other thing Beto did that now I see in a totally different light. We were considering Beto to become a Justice Democrat. Basically, he didn't make the cut. This was back when I was with Justice Democrats. And the final straw was, because we didn't even know about these other votes at the time, but the final straw was he wouldn't sign on to H.R. 676. Now, what is H.R. 676? Medicare for All. Now, he claims, well, no, it's only because I don't support that particular version of Medicare for All. That's the problem. To which, our response was, all right, but we'll iron out the details later. You need to sign on to Medicare for All. I mean, that is like a key litmus test on the left for anybody to take you remotely seriously. I mean, even people like, Kirsten Gillibrand are coming out now like, yeah, no, Medicare for All, of course. He refused to sign on to H.R. 676. Now, before hearing about the TPP vote and the Wall Street deregulation vote, I would have thought, well, maybe he's being serious. Like, he just supports a different kind of H.R. 676. But now I look at that in a totally different light, because you voted for fast track at TPP, you voted for Wall Street deregulation, and you're not signing on to H.R. 676. Well, if you wanted a different version of Medicare for All, propose it. Argue for it. Push for it. Now, the one thing I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on is the fact that he takes no corporate PAC money leads me to believe that I think he actually believes that doing TPP was a good idea and Wall Street deregulation was a good idea. In other words, I think there are many people who cast those votes solely because they're doing the bidding of their donors. I don't think Beto's doing it because he's doing the bidding of his donors. I think he's doing it because he actually is a centrist. Which leads to my final point. If he runs, he better come as advertised. But there's going to be 4, 5, maybe 6 candidates on stage to the left. Elizabeth frickin' Warren is to the left of Beto O'Rourke, okay? And what do I say about her? She's got one foot in the corporate Democrat camp, one foot in the actual lefty camp. So I just need everybody to keep Beto O'Rourke in perspective. If you always feel like, hey man, I'm skeptical of these smooth-talking politicians, you're right to feel that way. And in this case, the evidence and the record backs it up. So just understand who he is. And I'm very curious to see what happens. I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a lot of people running, and that's fine. That's totally fine. But number one, I want everybody to come as advertised. And number two, I want there to be more establishment people running than lefties, because then you split the establishment vote more and the lefties will be left with more votes. So I think that's a very, very important fact. That, if a guy like Beto runs, honestly, you want Hillary Clinton running. You want Michael Bloomberg running. You want Tom Steyer running. Like, you're going to want Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. You're going to want that establishment wing to split more of their votes. And then let's say you have 4 progressives running. Let's say 6 establishment people, 4 progressives. And then, a progressive will wind up on top. But the main thing is Beto needs to come as advertised. He would have been a superb senator from Texas. Eons better, not even having the conversation clearly about how he is compared to Ted Cruz. He just blows Ted Cruz out of the water. But for president, given those votes, me no likey.
Well, that was a pretty riveting and analysis by Kai, wasn't it? I know I played most of the thing, but I tried to do that because I really attempt to not regurgitate points, or if I do say something similar to what's said by him, I attempt to do it in a way that's not entirely as what's the term for it? It's not fully in the same way of just giving out a lot of information. So let's run down the list. Supports Israel unabashedly. Now, someone will say to themselves, why is that bad? What's the problem with that? Israeli government is an apartheid state screwing with Palestinians who are much lower than them economically, militarily. There's a lot of different factors that go into that position. But a lot of the modern left wing of the DNC are, such as myself, more leaning in the direction of trying to give Palestinians rights. It's bad enough we already go through what we go through with Ilhan and the different, ridiculous claims of her being anti-Semitic for critiquing a government. But, that's one problem of his. Now let's go over to the TPP thing. Now, I could easily do an entire video about TPP, all of the problems I have with it and just why it was a very crappy trade deal that should never have been supported by the supposedly liberal president. But we're going to stay away from that one for a little bit. Instead, I want you to pay a little bit of attention to the fast tracking part. Now, what O'Rourke basically was supporting there was helping the U.S. president, who at the time was from his party, become more like an emperor. As you heard Kyle say there, he's going to abdicate his responsibilities. I don't want the Republican member of Congress to decide this. I want the Democratic president to decide this. And see, those are the kind of things that really show how short-sighted a person is when you have the lack of realization to say, wait a second, a Republican might end up being president again. And if that ends up happening, and this position of mine of letting this one person have the final say on this topic, that might actually turn out to be a not very good, possibly horrid thing that screws people over. But again, no ability to see anywhere into the future, and really terrible at just having any kind of prognostic sense of U.S. politics. Now let's go to the final part, which was the Wall Street deregulation vote, which instant deal breaker. I'm so sick of the ideologues who will just sit there and tell you, oh no, Wall Street, they don't need any more regulations. Regulations cripple the creativity of entrepreneurs and all this trash. And that's why with a lot of the ideologues, I'll give you an example. There was a Mark Levin clip that he put out, or rather an excerpt of him that was put online right after the shooting of Steve Scalise by a Sanders supporter. Now, Sanders came out, condemned the shooting, condemned the person who did it, in I think very clear terms. But Mark proceeded to say, oh, well, Sanders supports violence because of his Marxist ideology. And I'm sitting here and I'm saying to myself, you literally had a member of Congress, or not even just a member, a person that you're alleging supports violence, condemn violence and never call for it in any instance. And because you want to stick to this hard line my ideology means everything and we can't access what someone is actually saying position, you're going to literally hear him say one thing and then interpret it the other way uh, just because you can. And I like think of how insane it would be if I sat here and I said Trump is he has the smallest number of, I don't know, African Americans ever in his cabinet, and then in some alternate universe every single person in his cabinet other than him is black, right? And I say he still has the smallest number of, and because I don't like him, I am literally going to deny reality. That's literally what was being done by Levin in that clip. But I bring it up to say that there are a lot of right wing people who will look at that deregulation and go, "Oh man, that was great," not because they actually know what's going on with Wall Street or that they think they've been seriously condemned at this point, but just so they can have their little ideological nonsense.
Amy and I are happy to share with you that I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States of America. This is a defining moment of truth for this country and for every single one of us. The challenges that we face right now, the interconnected crises in our economy, our democracy, and our climate have never been greater, and they will either consume us or they will afford us the greatest opportunity to unleash the genius of the United States of America. In other words, this moment of peril produces perhaps the greatest moment of promise for this country and for everyone inside of it. We can begin by fixing our democracy and ensuring that our government works for everyone and not just for corporations. We can invest in the dignity of those who work and those who seek to work. We can ensure that every single American can see a doctor and be well enough to live to their full potential. And all of us, wherever you live, can acknowledge that if immigration is a problem, it's the best possible problem for this country to have. And we should ensure that there are lawful paths to work, to be with family, and to flee persecution. We can listen to and lift up rural America. We can work on real justice reform and confront the hard truths of slavery and segregation and suppression in these United States of America. We can reassert our global leadership and end these decades-long wars and be there for every woman and man who has served in them. And perhaps most importantly of all, because our very existence depends on it, we can unleash the ingenuity and creativity of millions of Americans who want to ensure that we squarely confront the challenge of climate change before it's too late. This is going to be a positive campaign that seeks to bring out the very best from every single one of us, that seeks to unite a very divided country. We saw the power of this in Texas, where people allowed no difference, however great or however small, to stand between them and divide us, whether it was religion or gender or income or geography. We put our labels and our differences aside to come together for the only thing that matters: the future of this country and the generations that will follow us. Over the coming days, I'm going to travel this country and listen to those who I seek to serve, to understand from your perspective how we can best meet these challenges. On March 30th, I will be back here in El Paso, Texas, and I invite you to join us in a kickoff for this campaign. But even if you cannot be here on March 30th, I still want your help organizing where you live, bringing in friends and family and neighbors to the greatest grassroots campaign this country has ever seen. There's a lot more to come, but I want to leave you with this. The only way for us to live up to the promise of America is to give it our all and to give it for all of us. We are truly now, more than ever, the last great hope of Earth. At this moment of maximum peril and maximum potential, let's show ourselves and those who will succeed us in this great country just who we are and what we can do. Thank you.
If you want to downvote this, I really don't blame you. That was very horrible. That little, I'm apologetic in a million different ways that you had to witness that. No person should ever have to live through that torture, and I'm very sorry that you had to see it. I feel very ashamed of myself to even make you watch something like that. Now, other than the goofy hand motions, and we'll get back to those later, you literally watched 3 minutes of platitudes of everything I hate about modern politics. See, I'm of the belief that if a person runs for office, including myself, it should always only be because they think there is nothing they can do, or rather, there's nothing more substantial they can do to change an issue or a series of issues than being in the position that they're running for. Case in point, if I were running to unseat my congressperson, which I've expressed interest in doing because they are complete bile, I would say, hey, look, we need single payer because 30 million Americans don't have health insurance. We need to increase the wages. They've been stagnant for 40 years. We have a homeless problem where 40% of the homeless have jobs but still nowhere to live. You know, we need to figure out what the housing crisis is. I would be able to tell you multiple issues in an ad or some other official material that is supposed to be linked back to what I'm running on. And whether you disagreed with my position or not, you would still know what I supported. So when I watch him sit here and talk about the crisis, crises facing our the interconnected crises facing our economy, and you know, it's when that's followed by this will bring out the best of each of us, and when he starts off by talking about this group, and it's so devoid of any specifics to where there's even and I didn't put it here because I didn't want to overcrowd this with a bunch of clips. But there's a segment on Mike's channel, the Humanist Report, where one of his supporters actually confronted O'Rourke at a event he held at her school over his lack of policy proposals and just anything of specifics anything specific having to do with actually being a position of his. And I was so embarrassed that a person who spent, I mean, and we'll get to his fundraising after this, but this is a person who people at one point had at third place in the Iowa poll, meaning that if, God forbid Sanders and Biden couldn't run, well, not God forbid for Biden, but let's just say they couldn't run because, I don't know, they got sick for a year or something. If they couldn't run, he would have been the top person who was around for this cycle. And when you look at what he did in that clip, that should send shivers down your spine that this empty suit man was who at one point was considered a standard bearer for the DNC, at least in the latter part of last year, and I guess when he first got into the race. But yeah, that hand thing was horrible. You're going to see it be mocked here by both Jimmy and Trump, so you can see that, and I'll laugh along with you.
So guess what? Beto O'Rourke has announced he's running for president, and I was hoping the guy who couldn't beat Ted Cruz would throw his hat into the ring. I was really hoping that would happen. So I was afraid. I don't know if you saw, he gave a speech in Iowa. Was it last night or the night before? He gave a speech, and I was afraid it was going to be heavy on platitudes and low on, and light on policies. Well, let's just listen, shall we? Here we go. Ready?
These challenges, I'm absolutely convinced, will bring out the absolute best in every single one of us. And we have something that almost no other country in the world has. We have the single greatest mechanism to call forth the genius of our fellow human beings. This democracy, more than 320 million people strong, can bring the ingenuity, the creativity, the resolve of an entire country. And each one of these challenges can and will be met. But the foundational challenge to get all of this done is to fix our democracy. Only when it works, and only when each one of us can work within it, will we be able to meet these threats. And so this setting right now, the very first event of our campaign for president, is an example not only of the way that I wish to campaign across this country for every single American, and I could care less your party persuasion, your religion, anything other than the fact that right now we are all Americans and we are all human beings, and we do everything within our power for one another, for this great country, and for every generation that follows.
Boy, he's hand gesturing his ass. He's trying to lose weight, I think. That's why he's doing all that.
He's burning those calories.
Somebody told him that Bernie uses his hands a lot, so he decided to do it too. So this is what Bernie would look like if Bernie didn't give a shit about what he was saying.
Wait up. I want some more lemons. That's what. Wait up, more lemons. That's what Bernie Sanders does. That was fantastic.
What, Jim, you didn't find that inspiring at all?
Oh my God, I want to do everything I can for everyone to participate in democracy.
I learned a lot. I wish I would have been taking notes. A lot of information in that.
We have something that no one else in the world has, Ron. We have democracy. There's no other country in the world that has democracy. What the hell is he talking? I guess that just shows you Americans don't travel. He's not traveling, this guy, Beto. You got to get out of Texas.
I got to say, though, I did appreciate that he didn't care about my persuasion.
He does not care about your persuasion. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you lose to Donald Trump.
What's your reaction to Beto O'Rourke's announcement today, Mr.
Well, I think he's got a lot of hand movement. I've never seen so much hand movement. I said, is he crazy or is that just the way he acts? So I've never seen hand movement. I watched him a little while this morning I assume it was some kind of a news conference, and I've actually never seen anything quite like it. Study it. I'm sure you'll agree.
So the first couple of months of O'Rourke's campaign are largely uneventful. He comes in at third place. There's a poll where he was the third choice of millennial voters or younger voters, besides Sanders and I think Biden as well. And he raises the most money on his first day. There's a thing of how they don't specify where it came from. So there's, people are basically questioning whether that was all from individual contributors or PACs. But, he raises the most. And after a month, he begins to fall down already. And notably, with the exception of his state of Texas, which he goes from leading into being in second place to Biden at one point, he never climbs back up. He's always in 6th, 7th, 8th place for the remainder of the race. So that means his highest point was his first month, because in April is when Buddha Trash rose, and they asked him about it. He said, we didn't hire any pollsters. We're not worried about that. Liar. That's what all the people say when they're losing. So he's banking on having some good debate performances. And I mean, just take a look at what his idea of the mastery of persuasion, of just showing and entertaining people about his ideas is.
If I could, I'm sorry. Congresista O'Rourke, ¿qué haría usted en el primer día, si usted es presidente, sobre esta realidad que está ocurriendo? What would you do, Congressman, day one at the White House?
Vamos a tratar cada persona con el respeto y dignidad que merecen como humanos. We would not turn back Valeria and her father, Oscar. We would accept them into this country and follow our own asylum laws. We would not build walls. We would not put kids in cages. In fact, we would spare no expense to reunite the families that have been separated already. And we would not criminally prosecute any family who is fleeing violence and persecution. We would make sure...
Secretary, let him finish, and I will give you... But let him finish. Let him finish, please. Yes.
We would not detain any family fleeing violence, in fact, fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet today. We would implement a family case management program so they could be cared for in the community at a fraction of the cost. And then we would rewrite our immigration laws in our own image. Free dreamers forever from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens here in this country. Invest in solutions in Central America, work with regional stakeholders so there's no reason to make that 2,000-mile journey to this country.
Secretary, I'll give you 30 seconds.
Let's be very clear. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that. I just think it's a mistake, Beto. I think it's a mistake. And I think that if you truly want to change the system, then we got to repeal that section. If not, then it might as well be the same policy.
Let me respond to this very briefly. Actually, as a member of Congress, I helped to introduce legislation that would ensure that we don't criminalize those who are seeking asylum and refuge in this country. If you're fleeing desperation, then I want to make sure that you're treated with respect.
I'm still talking about everybody else.
But you're looking at just one small part of this. I'm talking about a comprehensive rewrite of our immigration laws.
That's not true.
And if we do that, I don't think it's asking too much for people to follow our laws when they come to this country.
I'm talking about millions of folks. A lot of folks that are coming are not seeking asylum. A lot of them are undocumented immigrants, right? And you said recently that the reason you didn't want to repeal Section 1325 was because you were concerned about human trafficking and drug trafficking. But let me tell you what, Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21 and Title 22 already cover human trafficking and drug trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
This is an issue that we should and could be talking about for a long time, and we will for a long time.
Can we talk about the conditions as to why people are coming here?
Let's Lester.
Because
Savannah. I know it's just we could go on.
But rather than talk about specific provisions, we really have to talk about why these people are coming to our country and what are we going to do to actually make a difference in these countries.
Diaz is. Yeah, it was really horrible. His first performance earns him a viral meme of Booker looking at him in a disturbed, kind of annoyed manner when he speaks Spanish. There's a poll about how people think that's pandering, which I don't disagree with them. Especially when it's done by an empty suit in a place that has people of various ethnic groups who you could reasonably assume wouldn't be able to speak it. But his second performance is looked at as being better. It's seen as, even though there's nothing really stand out about it, it's not as unstable and goofy and just a mockery of the whole electoral process. And with two debate performances that range from horrendous to it was okay. Heading into August, there's really no reason to give him any kind of coverage until something happens.
Shooter wrote that manifesto and that this was inspired by his hatred of people here in this community.
That's Beto O'Rourke showing just how horrified he was, as many of us have been, over the mass shooting that took place in El Paso, Texas over the weekend. 20 people were killed and dozens more were injured as a result of this shooting. It took place at a shopping center in El Paso. The shooter then went into a Walmart and continued opening fire. Now, the authorities were able to apprehend the gunman, and he is currently in custody. He's a 21-year-old who had posted an anti-immigrant manifesto online right before he committed this act of domestic terror. Law enforcement authorities have delved into the background of 21-year-old Patrick Crucius, whom two officials identified as the suspect who opened fire in El Paso. At this point, everyone has identified him as the shooter. What may have motivated the attacker remains a focus of investigators who have examined a manifesto posted online that included screeds against immigrants. So the manifesto specifically referred to migrants, specifically Mexicans, taking over the state of Texas. He also referred to it as an invasion, something that we hear quite often from the likes of Donald Trump. He would refer to the migrant caravan as an invasion. And he also talked about how this was what he needed to do to essentially protect the country and protect the white race, which he was concerned was being taken over by Latinos crossing the border. Now, Sheriff Richard Wiles from El Paso said, quote, "The Anglo man came here to kill Hispanics. I'm outraged, and you should be too. This entire nation should be outraged. In this day and age, with all the serious issues we face, we are still confronted with people who will kill another for the sole reason of the color of their skin." And it shouldn't really be shocking or surprising. We already had a giant issue with gun violence in America. We already had a giant issue with mass shootings in America. And then when you combine that with the rhetoric that you hear from Donald Trump, this type of action shouldn't be surprising. And it should be a moment of self-reflection, especially for Trump and the right wing.
the El Paso shooting is easily the most coverage O'Rourke gets throughout his entire campaign, with the exception of when he started it and with the exception of when he ended it. He gets asked about his opinion on it. He gives this impassioned, saddened speech, and then flies back and halts his activities for about a week or so to speak to and just address the shooting and its the aftermath of it. There's actually speculation at this point that he'll either end his campaign for the presidency to just go back home, or he'll end his campaign for president to run for Senate against Cornyn. But instead, that neither of those happen. He announces he's relaunching his campaign. He at one point gets a I wouldn't say viral clip, but there's a clip of him hugging this, or rather consoling this person who weeps over why, questions why this shooting had to happen here. He says, "Hey, I'm willing to give you this number my number to be able to get in contact with some mental help officials, people who can help him out with this, the trauma." And, I never doubt when they talk about something being creepy or horrible, their sincerity, even if they're a politician. If they say, "Hey, this is bad," I don't dispute that they think it's bad. It's just, what are you going to do about it? So O'Rourke uses this as a perfect opportunity to become the leading Democratic advocate for gun control.
You said, quote, Americans who own AR-15s and AK-47s will have to sell them to the government, all of them. The critics call this confiscation. Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work?
I am, if it's a weapon that was designed to kill people on a battlefield. If the high impact, high velocity round, when it hits your body, shreds everything inside of your body, because it was designed to do that so that you would bleed to death on a battlefield and not be able to get up and kill one of our soldiers. When we see that being used against children, and in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl who was shot by an AR-15, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Congressman, thank you.
And I want to say this. I'm listening to the people of this country. The day after I proposed doing that, I went to a gun show in Conway, Arkansas, to meet with those who are selling AR-15s and AK-47s and those who are buying those weapons. And you might be surprised, there was some common ground there. Folks who said, I would willingly give that up, cut it to pieces. I don't need this weapon to hunt, to defend myself. It is a weapon of war. So let's do the right thing, but let's bring everyone in America into the conversation. Republicans, Democrats, gun owners, and non-gun owners alike.
Can I make a point? Congressman, thank you.
Now, the reaction to his third debate performance, and most particularly that moment of declaring that we're going to take your firearms, was very divided. People, I saw one goofy person on MSNBC saying they're going to be playing that clip for years to come. O'Rourke, how could you do this? The Democrats are going to be considered gun takers. And I'm just sitting here scratching my head thinking to myself, because they're actually, when he ran for Senate last year, there was a song by Cruz where he said O'Rourke wants to, or rather the person singing it said O'Rourke wants to take our guns. So, and this is why I'm divided on my position about how impactful this was, like whether it hurt him or helped him. On one hand, I think that taking weapons away from people who have not shown a record of being violent and just have a weapon or 2, 3, 4, whatever, some number of guns, but as long as they have nothing on the record, I kind of don't see the problem with them having those, because they've proven themselves to be stable individuals. But on the other hand, this is the only time in the entire campaign where O'Rourke takes an issue and just latches onto it unabashedly. No flip-flopping, no, I'm kind of this way, kind of that way. And he really pushes himself into this see, the thing about being a progressive is there are issues that we discuss that a lot of the mainstream Democrats don't talk about. So we'll be more likely to talk about single payer or opposition to these trade deals, or some non-interventionist position on international issues, like getting out of these different unconstitutional wars. And a lot of the Democrats who fall in the neoliberal camp will be advocates for, immigration reform, whatever the hell that means, gun control, abortion rights, stuff that Republicans will take and say, okay, you are the opposite of me on this, therefore you are horrible. And in cementing himself this way, he continues to not seem to stand out at all, because he doesn't, other than being that one person who was from that one city that had a shooting during the presidential election. So he takes the quasi-progressive, definitely neoliberal wing and goes after proposals by Sanders and Warren during the following debate.
Thank you. Congressman O'Rourke, do you think a wealth tax is the best way to address income inequality? Your response?
I think it's part of the solution, but I think we need to be focused on lifting people up. And sometimes I think that Senator Warren is more focused on being punitive or pitting some part of the country against the other, instead of lifting people up and making sure that this country comes together around those solutions. I think of a woman that I met in Las Vegas, Nevada. She's working 4 jobs, raising her child with disabilities, and any American with disabilities knows just how hard it is to make it and get by in this country already. Some of those jobs working for some of these corporations, she wants to know how we are going to help her, how we're going to make sure that her child has the care that she needs, that we strengthen protections for those with disabilities, that she just has to work 1 job because it pays a living wage. And Senator Warren said, show me your budget, show me your tax plan, and you'll show me your values. She has yet to describe her tax plan and whether or not that person I met would see a tax increase. Under my administration, if you make less than $250,000 a year as a family, you will not see a tax increase. That family needs to know that.
Let me say, I want to give Senator Warren a chance to respond.
So I'm really shocked at the notion that anyone thinks I'm punitive. Look, I don't have a beef with billionaires. My problem is you made a fortune in America. You had a great idea. You got out there and worked for it. Good for you. But you built that fortune in America. I guarantee you built it in part using workers all of us help pay to educate. You built it in part getting your goods to market on roads and bridges all of us help pay for. You built it at least in part protected by police and firefighters all of us help pay the salaries for. And all I'm saying is you make it to the top 0.1%, then pitch in 2 cents so every other kid in America has a chance to
Senator,
make it.
Thank you.
That's
Secretary
what
Castro,
this is about.
All right, joining us now is 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Allison.
Great to have you. So let's dive into that exchange in particular, because it sounded like what Mayor Buttigieg was saying was that your plan was not fleshed out enough. Can you flesh it out more? How do you plan to get assault weapons away from people who don't want to give them up?
It's pretty simple. As with any law in this country, we would expect our fellow Americans to follow the law. It's one of those things that distinguishes us from so much of the rest of the world. We're a nation of laws, and no person is above the law, no matter how much they may disagree with a given law. We also have the precedent of Australia, which took the bold step of having a mandatory buyback of these AR-15s and AK-47s. As you know, weapons that were designed for war, to kill people on a battlefield, that have no use for hunting or self-defense in your home, but can kill people at a terrifying rate and terrifying numbers if left in the hands of civilians. And we've seen that in El Paso, in Dayton, in Odessa, throughout this country.
But
So
Congressman, I mean,
so
I
this
think-
is the right thing to do, and I fully expect my fellow Americans to follow the law.
You expect mass shooters to follow the law?
Our fellow Americans will follow the law, yes.
Congressman,
And
mass
every
shooters
one
don't
of
fall
those
by
16
definition.
million
The mass shooters in Parkland, in El Paso, I could go on for 10 minutes. They don't follow the law by definition.
There are so many instances
where the proposals that we've made, whether it is a universal background check or a red flag law or ending the sale of weapons of war or buying those that are out there back, would have stopped many of the shootings that we see in a country that loses 40,000 people a year to gun violence. Would it stop every single shooting? No, but that should be no excuse for not taking action now while we have the opportunity to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And we also shouldn't be limited by the politics or the conventional political wisdom or the polling or the consultant class or the NRA
understood.
on finally taking decisive action.
Understood. And I think that what Mayor Buttigieg was saying, yeah, it's obviously think high, aim, shoot for something aspirational, but it doesn't make sense that people are going to hand over their assault weapons. If they're mass shooters, if they want to do harm to people, they're not going to follow the law. So then what's your plan?
Yeah. So I don't know that you make any law or stop making any law because you fear that some people will not follow the law in any part of American life. And so, yes, if somebody has an assault weapon, a weapon of war, and poses a danger to people in their lives or people in their community or people in our lives, then we're going to stop them. And
meaning what?
And
you're going to go to their
matter
house.
for
Just
law
tell us
enforcement.
how it works. You're going to go to if somebody doesn't voluntarily hand over their assault weapon, you're going to go to their house, and then what?
If we pass this law, then I expect our fellow Americans to follow the law. And this is not speculation. We've seen other countries do this, like Australia, that have seen a significant decrease in
law. Law-abiding people follow the law, but our problem is with mass shooters who don't.
Allison, by that logic, we wouldn't commence writing any new legislation or signing anything into law for fear of some people not following the law. So we know, because we've seen this in other countries, that when we take this step, we save the lives of those who would otherwise be taken from these mass shootings. We prevent guns from getting into the wrong hands, and we take them out of the hands of those who shouldn't own them in the first place. And unlike a handgun or a shotgun or a hunting rifle, an AR-15 and AK-47 is materially different. It is a weapon of war designed to kill people on a battlefield. And if we just throw up our hands and say, this is going to be tough to do, or some people aren't going to follow the law, then we consign ourselves and become complicit in the deaths of our fellow Americans. And after El Paso or Odessa or Dayton or all these mass shootings, I'm not going to become complacent. I'm going to do what might be politically difficult to do. It may not be popular in all circles, but is necessary to save lives.
I understand that that's your aspiration. And I think that the question was, and then what? And then what's next? Because it sounds like confiscation. And I just can't tell if you're comfortable with that. That's a buzzword that makes a lot of people on the right and gun owners nervous. And so if that's what you're suggesting.
No, I'm not suggesting that. And I think that's why people use the word confiscation, because it scares people. What I'm talking about is a mandatory buyback, where Americans who own an AR-15 or an AK-47 will sell that weapon back to the government. And there is precedent for doing this in other parts of the world successfully, without infringing upon our fellow Americans' Second Amendment rights to own a firearm that they need for self-defense in their home or to go hunting or for collection or sport. We can take those weapons that pose a mortal risk to our fellow Americans, instruments of terror that have terrorized our fellow Americans, and for as long as they are out there, strike terror in the hearts of so many, including people going to school right now who are participating in active shooter drills because we still have these weapons out there. Let's do something about it.
Okay.
Last week, a very dumb Democrat candidate for president, that's the end of him in this state, pledged to revoke the tax-exempt status of many churches and religious charities. And by the way, that was after, a few weeks ago, he said, "Excuse me, we're going to take your guns away." That doesn't work well. And I called him right. Remember the flailing arms? Nobody noticed it. I noticed it. The flailer. You remember he was flailing all over the place. I said, "Why is this guy hot? John Cornyn's going to win so easily, just like Ted Cruz won. He's going to win, no matter what happens."
But John Cornyn is not talking about Beto anymore because Beto, in a few short weeks, got rid of guns and got rid of religion. Those are not two good things in Texas to get rid of. And I will never allow the federal government to be used to punish Americans for their religious beliefs. And I will never allow the IRS to be used as a political weapon, except in the case of myself, where they use it against me.
I attached that clip toward the end for one reason, and that was because I think the biggest problem with these presidential debates is that we never really get to see people explain in detail how they would go about doing anything. You get these little 1, 2, 3-minute clips that are played online for someone to laugh at or go, oh my God, my candidate did so great. So I don't like CNN. I've said they're a goofy source, but I really liked what they did to him in that clip where they asked him, hey, you know, we have laws, people break them. And his argument of, we have laws, of course people break them, but we're not going to stop passing them because some people don't obey it. I think it's pretty sound. And I'm saying that not as a supporter of his proposal, but I always hate that argument because, you know, these are the same people who, if I said, let's get rid of, I don't know, the red light meaning stop and making it a crime to, or, you know, some penalty for not obeying that. No one would say, why would you do that? No one would say, oh, well, you know, yeah, let's go ahead and make it to where you can just drive out no matter what the light is without any consequence. Because people would say, yes, there are going to be some people who don't obey the law, but most of them will say, all right, whatever, and just stick by it. You know, I'm thinking about when people would say, oh, Chicago is proof that gun control doesn't work because there's all those shootings over there. Never mind the fact that Chicago, as Jenks said at one point, is not an island, and you can literally go to a neighboring state and pick up a firearm and then bring it over there. So, you know, it really gets ridiculous. But I like that she questioned him about this. I'm really happy that occurred. And he just, for the remainder of his campaign, like, he's doing public interviews, he's giving some speeches, he's all over the place in terms of just being someone that, you know, is campaigning, but he's not moving up. He's sitting in the same position day after day, week after week. And we get to a point where it's Sanders, Warren, and Biden who just sit up at the top. And then Buttigieg is hanging on by a thread in Iowa. He's doing really good over there for no reason. And everyone else is just sitting at the same position month after month. So when he announced, I'm done, it took me by complete surprise yesterday. It was a big shock because I expected this buffoonery of a campaign of sitting at 2, 3, 4% month after month to persist until at least the first voting state. So maybe, you know, he drops after Iowa because Biden did that in 2008. He stayed on and then lost that state miserably. I think he was in 8th place and got out. Same with Rand Paul. He was in until Iowa, jumped out. So that's not necessarily the thing that's too shocking. And at one point, his campaign actually said, we're looking for top 5 finishes in the early voting states. And I said to myself, how pathetic do you have to be to go from saying, I'm going to win Iowa and I'm going to win New Hampshire, or, you know, I'm going to not win Iowa and New Hampshire, I'm going to win South Carolina, and then that'll give me the leeway to say, hey, I can do this. How pathetic do you have to go from saying, I'm going to win this state or that state to, I'm going to maybe be in the top 5 here and maybe be in the top 5 there and maybe be in the top 5 over here, and, you know, possibly, hopefully I might stay around and have enough money to make the debates and to, you know, be there until Texas swoops in and saves the day. And it's so pathetic to think about this race in hindsight because it literally accomplished nothing other than making him look like a bigger phony than he did after he lost the Senate race. I mean, he never polled in top status, or rather in the top couple of candidates other than when he first announced and prior to him getting in the race. which is, I call it the Hillary effect, where you go out and campaign and you do worse. And somebody can say, okay, that's due to having so many candidates, but you can't get in these races because, oh, this one poll said I was in this place, the other poll said I was in that place. They pick and flip between people all the time. They had a poll of Klobuchar with 8 points in Iowa at one point, and she hasn't been able to make that up since. It's not really hard to figure out that this campaign was a waste of time. People donated to a man who had no chance of winning. And the only accomplishment is that now we have another clip that Republicans can play over and over again of some crazy extremist liberal Democrat going around and saying we're going to take all your weapons, even if the rest of the party or people who they consider to be on the left, like myself, don't support such a position. And the biggest frustration is, as you saw earlier in this, where you had Kyle talking about the different issues that we found that he supported in a different way than we thought after the Senate election, is that we could have had a realistic chance of getting another Democratic senator. And one in Texas, his approval rating over there was so strong that even as he failed to crack the top 5 in any other state on the map, he was always in the top 3 over there. But no, he had his ego trip. He had his little I forgot to mention his Vanity Fair post where he said, "I was born for this." This narcissistic nonsense. No one is born to run for any office. You run for office, and if you win, it's because the people selected you in that moment. It's not about someone being ordained by the hands of Christ to take the mantle of neoliberalism that was left by the former President Obama. No. So all in all, a pathetic campaign, a complete waste of time, and a kind of sad ending for a guy that gave up his seat in the House because he thought he could win a Senate seat by engaging with everyone in the state, and minus a few hiccups, running a fairly effective campaign doing that, and who forgoed a possible chance at doing that to a level of success he didn't before, because Cornyn is not as well known as Cruz. Instead of doing that and challenging him and possibly giving the Democrats a much-needed Senate seat, he wasted months of everyone's time running in a presidential cycle that had, more fingers than me and the person next to me. They had more candidates than the amount of fingers on me and the person next to me. And it's very lame. So I'm going to close this out by leaving you with a clip of Trump reacting to O'Rourke getting out and Cenk's analysis, because I think he says it in a way that I wouldn't say it, but that I think is still worth listening to. No person should ever run for office again unless they have a list of policy proposals, which O'Rourke did not have when he started. No person should abandon their grassroots apparatus, which you're going to see he did, and that will be played later after this. It is a 101 on how not to run for any office, let alone president. So he's now a 2-time loser, and maybe he can go back to telling us why we're stupid for thinking that people should have health care automatically in the U.S.
In the world of the internet, in the world of smart people, that's why, like Beto wasn't smart, couldn't handle it. I told my wife, I said, see, it's not so easy. I told our great First Lady tonight, who people love, they love her. When Beto quit, he quit like a dog. When he quit, I said, see, people think this is easy. This isn't easy. But, it just worked out that way.
Yeah. So here's my take on Beto, and it's a really complicated one. And you really? Yeah. So let me explain why. Because a lot of other candidates are in clearly defined buckets, right? Biden, Klobuchar are more conservative Democrats. They say you don't really need any change. We're just going to fiddle around the edges, and we are not Donald Trump. Okay, and then there are the progressive candidates: Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. Those are very clear ends of the spectrum, right? And now this end of the spectrum is weighted down with almost all the other candidates: John Delaney, some of the former candidates like John Hickenlooper, et cetera. And then there was a small sliver in the middle that could have gone either way in the beginning of the campaign, right? They could have gone in the progressive route, they could have gone in the more conservative route. And so that was Beto, Buttigieg, and I would argue Kamala Harris, Gillibrand, and Booker, okay? So now that's small when you compare the 27 people that were in this race at different times, but it's an important 5. They're establishment figures that were leaning progressive, doing things like rejecting corporate PAC money, et cetera. So Beto, I have in the camp of well-intentioned within that bucket, okay? I also have Booker in that well-intentioned bucket, but ultimately made a terrible decision that probably none of the rest of the media will talk about now. That was absolutely decisive. So at the beginning of his campaign, he had his team that had done spectacularly well in the Texas Senate race, but particularly his field team, the people who organized the volunteers and the staffers to go out on knock on doors, make the phone calls. They broke every record there was in reaching out through grassroots in Texas. That's why he almost beat Ted Cruz in a spectacularly run race. So he had it, and that's why he raised the $6 million right in the beginning. People are like, oh my God. And in the beginning, he had started running as a real firebrand progressive, no corporate PAC money. And I'm gonna come back to that because he should get a lot of credit for that. Medicare for all, et cetera. Then near the end of the race, he was like, not really Medicare for all. And I was like, oh no. John covered.
I feel like we had those concerns much earlier though, even back during the Senate race.
I'm saying in the Senate race. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Thank you for clarifying. Yes. So I was just about to say, John watched the first debate that he had with Ted Cruz, came back and was like, I don't think he's for Medicare for all, right? Then Anna and I covered the second debate, and we did this all on tyt.com. We might have done it for the members, tyt.com/join, so you don't miss any of our content. So we came back scratching our heads like, he seems like he's leaning away from progressives now. And I think that that was a critical mistake. I think if he hadn't done that, he might have actually won in Texas. But most importantly, he runs that amazing race. He turns around and he's gonna run for president. And everybody says, Beto, you got this. You're the next Bobby Kennedy. You're gonna win. This is so exciting. So we brought in the Obama people. Now I would have said, and why would I want them? I have the most amazing team that's ever been assembled. So, and he's like, oh, Obama staffers. So he hired them and decided that they were not going to do the grassroots campaign that he had done in Texas. Disaster. So the grassroots team that was legendary left. Zach Mallitz, Becky Bond, and all the people that worked with them. These are diehard progressives and the best in the business in organizing, okay? So they immediately left because Beto decided to go in the opposite direction. Let me ask those people who believe in those Obama staffers now, how'd that work out for you?